Velkommen og god dag alle sammen. Welcome back to the channel where we use actual ancient sources to learn things about the pre-Christian Norse. If you like me, you're sick of people making videos and writing books and just having it be absolute garbage and not knowing who to trust. So on this channel, I tell you all the historical sources that I use and what I'm reading from, so you can go look it up yourself. So the video for today is for those of you who think Scandinavia became Christian in the year 1000, and any magic beliefs or tradition we find after that is not a pagan original. Well, as most of you, I hope most of you know, that's all a bunch of garbage, and today we are looking at a law book called Gulating from a few hundred years later, and that shows us how pagan beliefs continued for a long time. So the law code is called Gulating, like I said. And it can be traced back to Norway. I think it was first started in the 900s sometime, definitely in pagan times in Norway, and then just changed and evolved, developed with time. But I still even think some of it is in practice today, actually, in Norway. But anyway, we're looking at a couple laws that are written here in the year 1267. So that's almost 300 years officially after Norway became Christian, and this was under the reign of King Magnus Håkonsson, and his nickname was Magnus Lagabøte, which meant Magnus the law mender or lawmaker or something like that. So that's how he received his nickname, because he was just changing laws all the time and writing new laws and kind of trying to unify Norway all under one law at that time. I'm going to read this. I'll just show you it here. I'm going to read it in Norwegian because that's where I'm reading it from. It's Gulating's modern website, but originally it would have been in a pretty late form of Old Norse. And here it is. I'll put it in English right after. Og disse tingene tilhører til villfarelse og hedensk tro, galdrer og trolldomskunster, og det at noen mann kalles trollrida. Spådommer og tro på landvetter er i lundene eller haugene eller fossene, så også Utiseta for å spørre om skjebnen, og så de som sier fra seg Gud og den hellige kirke for at de skulle finne i haugene, eller på andre måter bli mektige eller vise, så også som prøver å vekke opp døde eller haugbu. So that was in Norwegian. For you Scandinavians watching, you probably understood that, but I'll just put my translation here in English as well, and I'm not a linguist, so I'm not sure how great the translation is going to be, but here it is. And with these things here belong to the wild roaming or wild practicing and heathen beliefs. Magic incantations and troll or wizardly arts, or what some people call troll writing, divination and belief that land spirits are in the groves or burial mounds or waterfalls. Also sitting out, like we see in the Old Norse tradition, utesitting, sitting out to ask about your fate, and they who renounce the Christian God and Holy Church in order to find power and wisdom in the burial mounds. Also those who try to wake up the dead or ones living in the mounds, probably referring to elves or trolls in pagan tradition and in folk magic tradition. So it doesn't give the punishment for these things here, because the punishment would have varied. It doesn't say it in the law book there, but punishments were pretty harsh for all of these things, actually. For example, utesitting was known to be punished by being outlawed, so it was one of the more severe punishments you could get. It was you would be outlawed, and people could basically kill you or do whatever they wanted with you, and you wouldn't be protected by the law at all. So I could go deep into this text and bring up all kinds of magic that we see in the folk magic tradition or pagan tradition. I got to talk for an hour, but I will do that in another video because that's going to take too long, and the videos I've been making lately have been long, and I just want to make this one quick. I have some small videos too. So I just wanted to talk about two things. First, What does these laws tell us? Well, these laws were put into place by a king in the year 1267, and that meant that these things were being practiced enough. They were being practiced so often that the king had heard about it, and he thought that it was so much of a universal problem for Norway that he felt the need to make a law for it to cover all of Norway. Now, this is important because a lot of scholars make the argument that when we see an example of something that was possibly a pagan tradition, they argue that it was just a rare occurrence, and they could just be one crazy person, living in the woods, some witch or something, and it had nothing to do with paganism at all. It was long after the official Christianization. So we see a lot of arguments like that. Especially looking at the witch trials, for example, that we see all around Europe starting in the 1200s all the way to the 1600s. And they say, oh, these people were not practicing paganism or pagan magic. It was something different made up by one lone, outlier, one crazy person who thought they were a witch. Well, that's all garbage. And this law code I just read proves that. Look, if it was just one rare person, one lone wolf every once in a while practicing some pagan tradition, someone like the king would have never even heard of it, and he would definitely never have felt the need to write a law to prohibit it. If it was just one person in the countryside that was caught doing some pagan ritual, they would have been banished or just burned right there on the spot, and that would be the end of it. It would have never reached the king's ears even. It would never have been brought to the king's attention. So I think this law, just the law that the king wrote about these pagan traditions, I think it proves that pagan tradition and magic was not something that was just practiced by one lone outcast living in the woods somewhere. It was practiced by a large number of the population, and out in the open pretty publicly, and not as privately as we think. These laws were probably put into place because people in the countryside were doing these pagan traditions so often that the church and local law enforcement had a hard time stopping it. So then word would have gotten to the king, and from all the rural areas in Norway and Scandinavia, and we would have had to put these laws into place. So that's the first thing that we can learn. The second thing is that the year when these laws were written, 1267, was probably the mark of a transition period in Norway from open paganism to private pagan practice. Now, a lot of dumb people, university professors included, I won't say any names, but there are some on YouTube, and they say that Christianity was made official in Norway right around the year 1000, and paganism was not practiced after that at all. They think of it as something that just ended paganism right there, and that is, of course, garbage, like most of you, I hope, know. First of all, the king who forced his Christianization on Norway in the year 1000, or just a bit before year 1000, I think, might have been 999 or 998, something like that. But he was Olav Tryggvason, and he forced Christianity, and it made people accept it, and he was actually hated and killed a couple of years later. And Norway went back to paganism officially, so people were fighting so hard for paganism that they killed the king who was trying to force it on them. That's the first thing it tells us. And the second, we have tons of records and evidence that pagans and Christians coexisted pretty peacefully for a long time after this. Slowly, pagan tradition would have been pushed away and had laws that were actually enforced, to pushing people to do it privately. So this did not happen quickly. It happened very slowly that paganism was pushed away out of the mainstream public. It did not happen over the span of 1 or 2 generations like some people think, but it happened over the span of almost 300 years. So let's say Scandinavia becomes Christian around the year 1000, and then in the year 1267 with these laws at the Gulating, it shows that pagan tradition was still being practiced out in the open by a large number of the population. Okay, that's pretty clear. King Magnus passed these laws, and it would have been more enforced then. So it's at that time that people probably felt the need to be more careful and practice their pagan magic and traditions more privately. So paganism was not pushed into private in the year 1000, as most history books will have you believe. I mean, think about it. Even though there would have been laws against paganism, started after the year 1000, they would not have been enforced. Just take the times that we're living in now, for example, with COVID-19. In my city, we're actually not allowed in public without a mask. Right now, in a part of Los Angeles, you're supposed to put a mask on every time you leave the house. But the police really don't care. Police are not writing out tickets. They're not enforcing the law at all. So we just walk out with no mask, and it's fine. Pagan Scandinavia would have been the same. Paganism was still practiced openly, probably almost 300 years later, and maybe they had some people to enforce it, but they just really didn't care. They just thought, let the pagans do their own thing. Then in the year 1267, that's when a lot of these laws come into place that made people put pagan beliefs into the underground a little bit more. So I'll make one point before I end the video. Yes, that pagan tradition around this time would have been pushed more into the underground. But also, it would have been adapted so they could practice this pagan tradition in public instead of just doing it in their own private homes or in the underground or something like that. For example, we see the practice of Utisitting was outlawed, where you go out and sit on a burial mound, and the land spirits and maybe ancestors and other things, you would receive some kind of wisdom or power from that. So it became illegal to sit outside at night in Scandinavia. Illegal to just go outside and sit there. So this practice turned into Arsgang, which is the exact same practice, same ritual. You go out and take a walk, except you don't sit down anywhere. You just keep walking. So you can see my video about the Arsgang, and that's the origin of that. That will be in the link in the description below. Also, you can take it a lot of the magical charms that we see in the folk magic tradition in Scandinavia. You can see here, I'll put it up. This is one of the Merseburg charms, written in Germany, actually, in pagan times, and it's a prayer to Odin to fix your horse's broken leg. And I'll show you right here. This is a spell that we see done in Scandinavia more than 1,000 years later, and it is pretty much exactly the same, except it's a prayer to Jesus instead of Odin. But it's clearly a pagan original. Most of the experts agree on that. So this is another thing that was just changed. People didn't stop doing pagan magic, they just changed it a little bit to make it legal, basically, so they wouldn't become outlawed or be killed or something for singing this basic song that the pagans used to do. So that's my point. That's about it for this video. Hope that was informative, and I'll make more videos about these laws coming up soon. Vi ses nästa gång.